Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's crack-a-lackin' fantasy champs?
Whoa.
My name's Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. What's poppin', Rick?
What's good?
I am ready for week 6.
Week 6, huh?
I'm freaking amped to watch football on Sunday. Like, I love later in the week. I live for the late in the week stuff.
You live for the later in the week?
Yeah, because that means we're getting
like
closer
Sunday?
to
Is that what you're
football. Yeah, come on.
Yeah. Same.
Jeez. Keep up, Rick. Come on.
Dude, I'm sorry, bro.
But anyway, yeah. So very exciting. Football's coming up this Sunday. Hopefully I can get a dub this time instead of absolutely getting pantsed after getting 49 from DJ Moore. That was a tough situation. But anyway, excited for the week. We have buys and sells on this episode. So we're going to give you our top 3 buys, top 3 sells, and send you away with adulation and excitement. I'm trying to treat every week like it's week 1 so that it's like exciting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people start checking out. I mean, like right
from
now.
From a non-fantasy perspective, as I would say probably CEO of the Patriots fan base, this is kind of a big week for the Pats. So you got that going.
Well, I passed the big week for the Pats thing last week. That's in the garbage now.
But I'm saying, like, this is kind of like
what do you mean is a big game?
It's a bit because if they lose this week,
yeah,
the season's completely over.
Well, see, here's the difference: is that I realized this week, like NFL teams,
if they win, there's at least fake hope.
Specifically, like the Patriots, right?
Yeah.
Bill Belichick doesn't ever think about long-term picture things during the season. He takes it 1 week at a time. So,
of course.
So like if everyone starts asking him questions about who the quarterback's going to be like next year,
he's going to sniffle and
he's going to snort, sniffle and be like, what the F you asking me that question for? That doesn't what? So anyway, they don't like to do a lot of, the Patriots specifically don't like to do a lot of that. So right now, like we're looking at the schedule going, Patriots lose against the Raiders. They could be 1-7 after the friggin' Bills and Dolphins game because they're not beating those teams. Of course,
they're not looking at it like that.
No, so they're just looking at it one game at a time.
Once we get back to reality.
If they win or lose this game, it don't matter. They're going up against the Bills, and they think they're going to have a chance. So,
yeah, we'll see how the play. And if they go 1-5, I guarantee you there's going to be some locker room stuff that's going to come out, and
yeah,
it's not going to look good
for sure.
But no, Bill can live in his little fake reality, his little. We're the Patriots still. Do your job. Woo! Yeah, good luck with that, Bill Belichick.
Next few weeks, Rick and I are going to start a Patriots podcast, and if you're a Pats fan, you can listen to
I wish we did in the offseason. I would have looked like a genius.
Maybe I should start that.
I would have had my pro Jacoby Myers takes.
Yep.
My anti-Patriots wide receiver core takes.
Yep. And I would.
That was pretty much. I was trying to.
I look like a total dummy. So there's that. But anyway, you're here for buys and sells for fantasy football.
Yeah, fantasy football. That's what we're talking about.
So before we do that, check out our website, fantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and the other podcasting platforms, please leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Click the bell for notifications, like, and comment down below any questions that you may have for us. All right, buys and sells. Let's get on it.
Who's our number one buy?
What'd you say?
Who's our number one buy?
Number 1. Shake and bake.
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley. And the Giants need him, I'll tell you. Things are not looking good for that football team.
Now, can I start with a question?
Go ahead.
Is it possible to buy Saquon Barkley?
Yeah, I think it is because he's been out for a little bit. So, I think that would be the buying point, is that a team who has him, maybe they're 0-5, 1-4. even 2-3, and they're looking to make a move. They're looking to make a change because they need to get some kind of production in the immediate moment to save their season. I think you definitely could get a trade from that. If you're talking about a team who's like 5-0, 4-1, like it's going to be far more challenging to get him from those teams because they're in the position they are despite not having Saquon. So I think it's just situational. Like if your league has a team with Saquon Barkley and they're legit 0-5 or 1-4, and that team is like, I need to get somebody for, like, you'll be able, don't jip them. Like that's not, we all want to win trades in fantasy, but like, don't screw them.
Right.
But like you can reasonably get him. I don't think the ceiling is, I don't think the hype is high for him right now because he's not on the field playing. He still has probably that first round, second round tag that would make him a little bit harder to get, but I think it's easier than it would have been, say, 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah. And I think, he's one of those players that like, he's a buy, but it's not a buy low necessarily. Like you're still going to have to pay a hefty price for him. It might just be, he's available.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not necessarily a buy low, but it's a case where a guy is usually an untouchable, but could be available, as you said, because the team is struggling. Yeah. I think another selling point that you could make an argument for is that the Giants' offense blows and that the Giants are about to tank. Their season's in the toilet. This team sucks.
Yeah.
And because of that, that might mean negative things for Saquon going forward, which I think is all real possibility, but it's still not worth the, I guess, the risk still doesn't outweigh the reward. Mm-hmm. When it comes to a guy like Saquon. So you can still trade a lot for him and still feel pretty good about it. I think he's still a top 5 running back. Mm-hmm. And with the way the running back injuries have been and everything that's going on at that position, a healthy Saquon, I mean, I don't know what the list looks like. I'd have to go and look, but I think there's probably only like 2, maybe 3 guys that I would take ahead of him.
Yeah. I agree.
The rest of the season.
I agree. And especially with like, I don't know if you just said this, but when the host isn't listening.
Way to pay attention, dude.
No, but is that like, I've noticed specifically, you probably didn't say this, I've noticed specifically that the running back position too has been very like depleted.
I vaguely brought that up, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's like just like really weird guys are in the top 7. So, like getting Barkley back into that conversation, would push some guys down, and obviously Barkley, because of his talent and ability, just pushes him right back up. So.
I mean, just off like, I think it's probably McCaffrey and then Eckler and then maybe Bijan, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Outside of that, I think he could probably be 4 rest of the season.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, let's talk about our second buy is Devonta Smith. He has been big time underperforming so far this season, and big time underperforming last week. Yeah, I'll take that back. I had him. I traded him to Rick this week. But so Rick bought. But no, the last 3 weeks, first 2 weeks of the season, 17-23. And I remember, Thursday night football, Minnesota, we're at B-Dubs watching this football game, right?
Yeah.
That was the B-Dubs? Yeah. So we're watching this football game at B-Dubs. And all of a sudden we see A.J. Brown have a little meltdown on the sidelines. Since then, A.J. Brown has been an absolute monster. And Devonta Smith has had a reduced target share. He's had 6, 14, and 1 in the last 3 weeks in fantasy finishes. So obviously not what you want to see. He's still a wide receiver 26, and I think he's better than that. But it has been disappointing to see that. Now, knowing Philly, they have 2 of the best receivers in football on their team. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that at some point, either one of these guys is going to, like, it's going to, last year it ended up a split down the middle. It's going to end up a split down the middle at some point this year where they're both getting 7 to 9 targets a game. And so that's the benefit of having Devonta Smith and the fact that right now he's cheaper to get. Like, you're not going to have to spend massive pieces to get Devonta Smith because I think the person that drafted him in the second, third round is probably feeling like, dang, I'm not getting the production out of him. So I would buy
Right.
Devonta Smith this week.
Yeah, and the thing with Devontae is that, as you kind of mentioned, the Eagles. I was kind of looking at it last year, and the same thing happened where most of the time
Mm-hmm.
there would really only be one guy going crazy off. Some weeks there was actually, especially the end of the season, both guys were going off. Both guys were getting like 15 plus every single week.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of weeks in there where AJ Brown would have like a 2 or 3 week stretch where he wasn't doing anything, and in that same 2 to 3 week stretch, Devontae Smith was getting pretty good fantasy numbers.
Yeah.
And then vice versa. And just looking at Devontae last year, he had a game with 0 points in week 1. I don't think he was injured. He had a 96% snap percentage.
Mm-hmm.
He had a 4-point week, and then he had 2 weeks in a row where he had 7 and 4. But then he followed that up with 13, 13, 9, 21, 17, 31, 17, 20, 13. So, like, I think it comes in streaks. The Eagles' passing offense is not good enough to, I think, consistently sustain 2 wide receiver ones.
Yeah.
But it's good enough to the point where each guy can have a monster week.
Right.
And I do think Devontae's due. Granted, might have been a week too early for me to make that trade because he's playing the Jets this week, who have a ridiculous secondary.
Yeah.
And defense. They are number 2 in the league.
You know what? Sauce is going to be on A.J. Brown. So A.J. Brown will have a massive game.
That's true.
And DJ Reader will shut down.
That's what I'm hoping for.
That DJ Reader shuts down Devonta Smith?
No.
Sauce has sucked this year.
Sauce shuts down A.J. Brown.
Sauce has sucked this year.
He sucked the first couple of weeks, but he's been good lately.
He's mid.
He shut down Jerry Jeudy.
oh, shaking in my boots.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go to the third guy. Is Jalen Waddle.
This is the guy I was trying to get.
One
of the guys I was trying to get before I took Waddle. Before I took Devontae Smith for me.
Yeah. But I would say they're both in the same conversation. But
personally, I like Waddle more, but that's just me.
Waddle, he missed a week. He's had 11, 12, 8, 14, so a little bit more consistency. And I have said this before to Rick. I think the Miami Dolphins right now, regardless of the inconsistencies, I think on a week-to-week basis, I think they have the best offense in football.
Yeah.
Maybe the 49ers is like a tick better. But just out of sheer speed and I think you can, as a defensive coordinator, live with playing the San Francisco 49ers. I think as a defensive coordinator going up against the Miami Dolphins, you're sleeping.
Do you think the A-Chain injury hurts though?
It might hurt a little bit, but I mean A-Chain was a recent thing. They were still able to run the football the weeks before A-Chain broke out. So I don't think it really matters for them. But they unlocked the run game in some way, which they didn't do last year. They got solved last year because they threw the ball way too much, and they got to a point where they couldn't run the ball, and they just had to chuck it. This year, they've been running the ball way more effectively, which opens up their whole friggin' offensive game plan. So either way, they're one of the best offenses in the league, top 3 at minimum. And Jalen Waddle is a part of that. He's the wide receiver too. So I would go out and grab him. I think he's got better days ahead of him as well. Smith is the wide receiver 26 right now. In only 4 games, Jalen Waddle is the wide receiver 47. So, obviously these 2 guys have been underperforming a little bit. The 3 guys that are wide receiver 2s on their football teams have been massively underperforming. T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith. Underperforming where people had them, which is low-end wide receiver 1s this year. And so I think that, I don't know about T. Higgins, throw him in a box, but Waddle and Devonta Smith will definitely bounce back, and I think that you have to get this guy on your team.
I would put Higgins in there too. I mean, he's not on our list, but I think Higgins does as well. I like all 3 guys still rest of season.
Yeah.
Waddle, I think I've always liked him more than you. And I think I still like him more than you. And you're the one that put him on this list. So, I mean, hey, it shows that he really is a good buy right now.
Yeah.
This past week, Tua, by the way, I don't know if you noticed or saw this, but he threw a pick 6 at the goal line. and it went 99 yards back the other way.
Of course it did.
That throw was intended for Waddle. If they connect on that play, Waddle gets a 20-plus point week.
Yeah.
And the bye window is probably over. And Waddle, I mean, again, he's like looking at his stats last year, had a lot of like decent games.
Yeah.
But then he would just explode for some weeks. Like he'd have 25, he'd have a 30, he had a 40-point week last year.
Yep.
Then he'd kind of live around like 14, 15 points. And I think that's what he's done so far this year. I mean, he's been even worse than that.
Had that big game
I don't think that continues. Like he's had 11, 12, 8, 14. Those were some of his worst weeks last year. And I think Tyreek Hill missed like 2 games last year. And I think one of those big Waddle games came from a Tyreek Hill game, but still, he still had some big games.
If Homie wouldn't take Tony Pollard for Jalen Waddle in that trade you were talking about, what would he take?
Yeah, I don't know. He didn't. That's what I offered him. He said no. So that just shows you.
Go ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, I mean, he's up. His schedule is also pretty easy, as you mentioned. I mean, the Dolphins' offense is ridiculous. He only has 1 touchdown this year, so it's like as good as the Dolphins' offense has been, it's kind of been mostly Tyreek Hill in the run game.
Yeah, for sure.
So like Waddle's due for a game where he gets like 2 or 3 touchdowns. He is due. I still think he's a ridiculous player, and he's a player that can get you. Like I love Devontae Smith. I don't think Devontae is capable of getting like 40 points in a week.
Yeah,
I think Jalen Waddle is capable of getting like a 40-point week. He has that type of explosion. So I do think it's a great time to buy. His schedule is pretty easy as well, rest of the season. So, and he hasn't had that big game yet. It's a good time to buy him.
For sure. All right, let's move to the sells. Number 1, we have George Pickens coming off a massive 26-point game in PPR. He has been, I'm going to pull up the numbers just to have some information in front of me, but he has not been great on the season. And I felt as though he was going to be, possibly like with the way the Steelers played in the preseason, they had me buying on everything. You know what I'm saying? They had me thinking that Kenny Pickett was going to be a breakout.
Hey, as of right now, you were right about Pickens, at least.
Yeah, he's wide receiver 13. But he's wide receiver 13 realistically off of 2 games, and that was against Cleveland and Baltimore. He does have massive performances because he has the ability to make ridiculous catches, and they love to target him. But there are games where he throws up burgers. And I think right now, considering that he's rated as the wide receiver 13 at this point, I think that is a good sell because I don't necessarily think that, like, maybe the Steelers' offense improves over time. Maybe they dump Canada. I don't think Pickett's bad. I don't think Pickens is bad, obviously. I think those guys are great, but I don't think Pickett's great, but I think they're better than what they're playing, and I think it's the offensive coordinator, to be honest with you. So, but I think if they start rolling, obviously Pickens is going to be really good. The question is, do they start rolling? And I don't think that's going to happen, at least with Matt Canada at the helm. So I would sell George Pickens off these few big performances and the fact that he's wide receiver 13. Maybe go get something for your team that's a little bit more consistent.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that you didn't mention that is important for me with Pickens is Deontay Johnson, and he's supposed to come back after the bye.
Yep.
In week 1, Johnson got hurt in the first half. He was out targeting Pickens. I believe it was like 6-3.
Yeah.
In week 1, and then Deontay Johnson got hurt. He hasn't played since, and since then Pickens has been getting targeted a lot. He's been their wide receiver 1. I think when both guys are out there, Pickens is still the big play guy, and because of that, might have better weeks. But I don't think he gets 10 targets a week with Deontay Johnson. And with the way that offense is, Pickens is going to have to rely on monster plays to stay relevant every single week. And I don't think that can remain consistent. So he's a great sell for me because at wide receiver 13, I think that he's got some of like that hype of the young breakout receiver to go along with his really good start, that you can trade him for probably a really good player right now, when in reality, I don't think he is going to finish as a top 15 guy, especially once everyone gets healthy. And again, that Steelers offense, man, it's brutal. It's brutal to watch.
All right, next sell is George Kittle with the San Francisco 49ers. I actually like Kittle. I don't think he's bad, and like, in fantasy football, it's hard to find tight ends that can produce at least somewhat on a regular basis. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Hawkinson last year before he got traded from the Lions. Rick mocked me for having Hawk a lot. And he would always just get like 4, 5, 6, 7 point performances. He at least put numbers on the table.
4.
Yeah, 4's bad. But he would just have mid performances where he'd get maybe 7, 8 points, and it's not great, but it doesn't murder you in fantasy football completely. So, and then obviously you have these bigger weeks where he'd have success. For Kittle, he's kind of been doing that. He's at 4, 6, 16, 1, and 27. And he's not bad. Like, if you want to keep him and just keep starting him on a week-to-week basis in an offense that's good, like that, I don't judge you. But it's clear they ask him to do one thing. And there's, to me, like, I think the big problem with San Francisco, we talk about in the offseason when we're scouting tight ends for a possible breakout, where are they on the tree of target shares? You know what I mean? And to me, I think he's third on the list. And he might be 4 behind Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
So it's like he just doesn't get a massive amount of targets. Some weeks he's the focal point depending on matchups, and what they feel like they can do as an offense. But like some weeks it's just not. Like this week he had 3 catches for 67 yards and 3 touchdowns. So all of his catches were touchdowns essentially. And it's like that's a high efficiency game. Like normally you get 3 catches for 67 yards and only get 9 fantasy points. So obviously you'd like to see the target share more and stuff like that. If you want to keep Kittle, that's fine. But right now he is the tight end 6 on the season. He's been performing decently for the most part. And I think, if you have an opportunity to sell him to a team to get an asset that makes sense, I would do it because I think, George Kittle's inconsistencies will probably be very annoying for your fantasy team as the season goes along.
Yeah, and we've talked about Kittle before on this show. I think it was after his first 2 weeks when we were like, "Is it time to panic on Kittle?" Mm-hmm. And I said no because this is who he is. He gets 4, 5, 6 points, and then he'll get 20.
Yep.
And then he'll go back to scoring minimal points. And he had 2 last week against Arizona and follows up with 27. He's just very, very inconsistent. Which, if you're willing to live with that at tight end, like for me, I am. So I'm okay with it. I think other people are okay with it. So I understand holding him.
Yeah.
If I would probably, depends on what my team looks like, but I wouldn't mind holding him. I've always been a Kittle guy anyway, but the logic is definitely there to sell him right now. Coming off that 27-point week, super high efficiency. You're right. He hasn't had more than 3 catches. He had 7 catches in one game. Outside of that one game, he hadn't had more than 3.
Yeah.
So 3 is the second most catches in a game, which is not appealing. And I do think Kittle's a beast, but San Fran just has so many weapons. Ayuk, Debo, and you mentioned McCaffrey too. Kittle has 23 targets on the season. McCaffrey has 24. So technically, you're right. Kittle is the 4th option in the receiving game. He's at least 3rd or 4th, depending on what the week is. So, it's not something that you love, even though it's a great offense, right? Yeah. And it's still George Kittle, and he is the red zone guy, as he showed this week, and he can make big plays out of nothing. And he's gonna get you monster weeks. But if you want to sell him high off maybe his best week of the season, like I don't know if he's gonna get another 27. He'll probably get a couple 20s in there, but 27 might be his best week of the season. If you want to sell him off that, go right ahead.
So let's get to the last guy, and I kind of like couple him together with all of the old men that still produce in fantasy football at the running back position.
Would have been James Conner, but
the likes of James Conner. But the likes of Derrick Henry, right? And you got Alvin Kamara, 28 years old. It's a year younger than me, so that shows you. Old men running backs, not really. But Kamara's had a really successful career, done a lot of really good things. He came back from suspension, correct? 3 games.
Yep.
And he started with Tampa Bay, got 21 fantasy points, and then against New England he had 18. So, he's been producing, and that's all with, only 1 touchdown. So he's been producing, and he's actually been good. for fantasy football. He's actually been a steal. And it's another one of those guys that, like, I don't mind having if you want to keep him. You know, I think
Absolutely,
where you
yeah.
got him, he's a good flex. Like, I don't think that I'm not calling for some kind of Alvin Kamara calamitous, you know, fall from grace where he just sucks rest of season. But I do think that these two big performances kind of put people back in the mindset that maybe Kamara is an RB1, and that he can produce as that rest of season. Where I don't know that if that's the case, like I would put him probably in the low end RB1, high end RB2 conversation, but I think you can still get RB1 value for him. So if you have him and you already have running backs on your team and you're in a PPR league, you need receivers. Like, this is a guy that I would sell for a receiver in a heartbeat. So, you know, if there's an opportunity to get Kamara moved on your team and you can improve it, then I would do it. But otherwise, like, if you want to keep him because you're desperate for running backs, that's okay too.
Yeah, and I think I'm a little bit higher on Kamara, not by much, but
Yeah.
I do like the 21-18 does feel like a little bit much. But I do think he's still pretty good, and if you want to hold him again, kind of like Kittle, and even Pickens, right? And none of these guys are bad players.
Yeah.
I think if you want to hold Kamara, that's fine. It does feel like a okay time to sell him though too, because he's coming off that suspension. He has 2 really good weeks, and he's Alvin Kamara, right? You people who play fantasy view this guy still as like, you know, maybe not McCaffrey, but the next, like, probably in the Saquon tier, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think he's that anymore. Even just like last year, he did only have 4 touchdowns, so he probably would have had a better season if he just scored more, but was the RB 16 in 15 games.
Yeah.
Like, I think he's, you know, you play a full season and then you got a couple touchdowns, maybe he gets like RB 11, RB 12. And that's kind of where I view him. I think he's probably like around RB 12. So that is to me like a low end RB1, but it's not the Alvin Kamara that people I think he is. Some people might think he is. So if you can trade him for an elite wide receiver or even that second tier wide receiver, go right ahead. Because in PPR, I would probably rather have like the wide receiver 17 or 18 than the running back 12 or 13.
Okay. All right. Any more thoughts on these guys?
That's probably it.
Okay, there you go. Trade targets for the week in the books. Buys and sells. Get them on your team. Sell them off your team. Go make some trades. You need to improve your team. I made a trade this week. I'm feeling good. I might make more trades before Thursday Night Football.
Whoa.
So let's do this. Have a fun weekend, guys. See you later.
Peace out.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.